These are the highest numbers in history. And we're seeing so many people struggling with anxious feelings, many people struggling with depression, and we're seeing more young people than probably ever. It is like an epidemic with young people, especially since the pandemic. We've seen a significant increase in rates of depression. And we're going to talk about a number of factors that can help us or hurt us, make us more prone to being depressed, and also how we can change certain things to make it more likely to be able to overcome depression. And so we're going to begin by talking about improving your mood with something called negative ions. Negative ions. What is this about? This is a video clip from a documentary that my wife and I made called Ancient Health.
Let's talk a little bit about air. Air being one of the acronym in NewStart, the A is for air.
And of course, we're speaking about good, fresh air. What's surprising to many people in the urban environments in which the majority of the world's population lives is that many of us are deprived of this very important commodity.
There's actually good air and bad air.
We know that foul air in the cities will, for example, double heart attack rates, which is a big problem.
If you go into a congested city environment, you actually don't, you kind of feel a little down. You're a little gloomy. The air is just not as fresh as compared to going along a mountain stream with this river that's cascading down the mountains and the birds are singing. The sense that you have there, and why is that?
In these environments, there are negatively charged air ions.
We can go out on the trails and just breathe in just good air, good quality air.
The air around waterfalls, lakes, oceans, pine trees, cedar trees, mountains, that negatively charged air is good for you. It's actually positive for you.
Have you ever noticed how good you feel after a thunderstorm or after being by the ocean surf? The reason, again, is that these environments create and have the highest concentration of negative ions available.
These negatively charged ions have a mood-elevating effect.
Out there, the light rain, when the rain comes down, the negative ions go up. All of that fresh air, anytime you can get out of the fresh air, you're going to be better for it mentally and physically.
The brain needs oxygen. The nerve cells need oxygen to function adequately. And when you're not sitting up straight, when you're not breathing deeply, then your tissues are going to be lacking oxygen and you're going to start feeling tired and fatigued.
When we had this, oxygenation that's increased, it really does improve our mental ability, and you just feel much better. I mean, you feel like, man, my mind is clear.
And so it's very important that we get that fresh air as we want to improve our mental health and our cognitive performance.
So getting enough fresh air is actually valuable, and the quality of air is also very important.
So my prescription for health would include getting out into nature. Get out after a thunderstorm and walk. Go by the ocean surf. Go to an area that has up in the mountains with lots of trees. Get the best out of the time that you exercise.
The thing is, you can combine these things. You know, if you're drinking water, you're out in the sunshine, and you're exercising out in nature, and you're getting fresh air, you didn't have to think, well, I just got 4 of the 8 natural laws, and I thought I was just walking out in nature.
All right. Wasn't that nice? Yeah. So, another thing to share is the influence of pure, fresh air is to cause the blood to circulate healthfully through the system. It refreshes the body and tends to render it strong and healthy, while at the same time, its influence is decidedly felt upon the mind, imparting a degree of composure and serenity. So it's so important that we get out and get the fresh air, right? You heard in the video that it has a tranquilizing effect. It has a calming effect. And so if we're stressed, anxious, it's just good to get up, move, go outside, get fresh air, and you'll start to feel the calming effect. Has anyone heard of this? SAD, seasonal affective disorder. About 6% of Americans deal with SAD. And it's during the winter when the sun isn't as strong, right? And it doesn't come up as high. At least up north, it doesn't so much. We lived in Iceland for a year, and in Iceland, you didn't really see the sun itself in the winter. You would see light for a few hours, maybe from like 10, 11 o'clock till like 3 o'clock. You would see light, but you wouldn't see the actual sun because it wouldn't come up over the horizon. So talk about being discouraged without light, right? And so we said if we ever went back to Iceland, we'd bring a light box with us. And so we did. Next time we went back, a couple more times, we brought a light box with us so that we would have light during the dark times. But you know what's interesting is getting outside is really important even during the winter when you don't have that much sun. And this is why when you go outside, it's always brighter than it is indoors. Doesn't matter how gloomy of a day it is, it's still going to be brighter outside than it is indoors. And so that's a light that we need. And especially the morning light is so important. We had a friend who lived in the southern part of Norway, but then she moved up to a very northern city. And she said at first it was kind of discouraging, but then she decided, I'm going to go out into the light regardless of the weather. And so she would go in the morning. She'd go early in the morning, and she'd see that like morning glow. It was like a blue light. And she said, if I saw the blue light, my mood would just be good. She said, I could handle it. And she said, I never got depressed after that. That if she could just see the blue light of the morning. So isn't that powerful? But in case you can't do something like that, there's other light therapy other than just, the sunlight or just light in general, even if it's not the sun, is what they call light boxes or happy box. Have you guys heard of that? Where you put a light next to you, like either in the morning while you're sitting and reading the Bible or having breakfast, you sit it next to you and you have it hit your eyes, but you don't look directly at it, just like you don't look directly at the sun. And as you look at it, or as you have it hit your eyes, you should do it for at least a half hour to 45 minutes in the morning. And it needs to be, the lumens need to be 10,000 lux, that's Lux, or above. So not below 10,000. So it's 10,000 lux, Lux. And they say that that's what's helpful to not only get over the blues, but also have more energy in the winter. You notice in the winter, we usually tend to not have as good energy. But some people find that even if they're not depressed, but just having that blue light helps give them energy in the wintertime. So just something to think about if you struggle that way. But again, if you get out in the light outside, you'll have that blue light that you need. But in the evenings, what does the sun look like in the evenings? It's got a warm light, a warm color, right? It's not that bright blue. It's a warm color, just like a fire. For centuries, people sat in front of a fire before going to bed, right? And that fire, that color is soothing, just like the sunset. And that's preparing us for bed. But what do we have in our homes today? We have bright lights, right? We have the blue lights in our home. So what you could do is, let's say you have can lights in the home, and you can make those the bright ones, but in the evenings, turn those off and have lamps that you put soft lighting in. So that that's not the bright light, it's the evening light, a warm light. Does that make sense? So you can have that to kind of put you in that mood instead of waking you up like the morning light does. It should help you to fall asleep. Or you could have a fireplace and sit in front of the fireplace before going to bed and just have that same sedative effect on you, right? All right, but this is so exciting. Listen to this verse. I love it, especially after living in Iceland and dealing with the weather there. Ecclesiastes 11 verse 7 says, "Truly the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to do what? Behold the sun." Isn't that true? That it's a pleasant thing, right? And it's a sweet thing, and it makes us happy, and it elevates our mood. So important. Get outside to get the fresh air, but also get outside to get that light that we all need. What about water and happiness? Individuals were surveyed and asked how many glasses of water they drank on a daily basis. It turned out that those who drank a minimum of 6 glasses per day were over 3 times more likely to be what? Very happy compared with those who drank less than 1 glass of water per day. So just drinking more water will make you happier. And think about it. Our brains are mostly water. The large percentage of our brain is water. 70+% of our brain is water. So where's one of the first places you're going to feel dehydration is in your brain. So it makes sense that the more you drink, the happier you'll be. So, but the studies showed it, right? But you say, does it matter if it's water or if it's some other liquid? You know, you say, but I drink soda. Shouldn't that be enough? It shows here that higher consumption of soda is associated with higher rates of depression. So the more soda you drink, the more depressed you'll be. So it's not just liquids, it's water. You can't improve on God's beverage, right? All right, what are some other methods of overcoming? So we talked about negative ions, light therapy, but what about exercise? I have a question. How many miles would you have to walk off a pound of weight? Anybody will have a guess? Nobody? All right, I'll tell you. What's that? 25? Close. That's closer than saying nothing, right? No. 35 miles you would have to walk to lose 1 pound of weight. Or you run 35 miles to lose 1 pound of weight. So my question to you is exercise a good remedy for losing weight? No. But what a good remedy it is for being happy and having a clear mind. Because when you exercise, then you're just going to be a happier person and make better decisions. So then that'll help you with your weight, right? And it does help a little bit, but weight, the cause is the input, right? What you put in, you're not going to work all of that off. Does that make sense? It's about how much you put in. It's the calories. And so your best thing is to use exercise to run away from depression. All right, what is this all about? Is it possible to run away from depression? So this is a study about exercise versus meds. A meta-analysis was conducted looking at 25 different studies on the impact of exercise compared to antidepressant pharmaceuticals. Exercise evidently just as effective as the medication when it comes to depression in non-severe depression. So that's what they say, and that's what they've said historically, that, well, exercise helps in non-severe depression. But now a small study in British Journal of Sports Medicine looked at aerobic exercise and moderate to severe depression, major depression. The participants would exercise daily by interval training. You guys know what interval training is? It's when you run real fast and then you stop and you walk and then you run, you challenge yourself. You run real fast and then you walk and back and forth like that. So and I guess that's what it says. They would run for 3 minutes, then walk 3 minutes for a total of 30 minutes over the course of 10 days. But they took off one day. there was a statistically significant reduction in depression in those exercising. And this was major depression. And so this interval training, that means getting your heart rate really pumping, really helped lower the depression. Isn't that powerful? That these are just simple things, right? Like we talked about the other day, simple things where you're just making little changes here and there, but they have a synergistic effect that when you start doing all these things together, you can battle depression. Good evening. They concluded the study by saying that this form of interval exercise training can have a substantial improvement in depression levels in people with major depression. And so it's about getting your heart rate going too, right? If you get your heart rate going, that gets your blood stimulated, and that's what you want for the brain. You want the blood stimulated. So there's another study called SMILE. That's a Stanford Medical Intervention and Long-Term Exercise. It was a 16-week trial, and they had 156 patients put in 3 groups. They had a Zoloft group, which Zoloft is an antidepressant. Then they had an exercise group, and they had a third group, which was exercise and Zoloft. So they combine them. Which group do you think did the best? Just off the top of your head. Yeah. Okay. We'll see. So the exercise group. To exercise, or what they had to do is exercise 30 minutes to 70 to 85% of their target heart rate. And they did it 3 times a week. So not that much. All had a drop in depression. So every group had a drop in depression. Nearly half of each group were no longer depressed. An additional 13% had less symptoms but were not totally depression-free. But what happened 6 months later? 6 months later, the exercising group was doing the best. Isn't that interesting? 55% of the mixed group, and that's the exercise and Zoloft group, they were depressed 6 months later. So 55% of that group were depressed 6 months later. 52% of the medication group were depressed. So not much difference between the medication group or if you did medication and exercise. But actually, it's kind of interesting that the people that did medication and exercise were not doing as well as the ones that just did the medication. I don't understand that. But anyway, they didn't do as well 6 months later. But guess who did? Only 30% of the exercise group was depressed 6 months later. So that is significant. Because guess what? Exercise doesn't have the bad side effects that medication does, right? Medications have a lot of side effects, but the exercise doesn't unless you hurt yourself because you overdo it. But we were made to move. That's the bottom line. We were made to move. What about sugar and depression? It has been discovered that people who ate more sugar were more depressed. But the question remained, was it the depression that caused people to eat more sugar? Or was it the additional sugar that was a causative factor in the depression? Good question, right? Which came first? A study from the University College London looking at more than 8,000 adults following them from the 1980s discovered that men who ate the most sugar had a 23% higher likelihood of becoming depressed within the next 5 years. So the more sugar you ate, the more likely you would become depressed within the next 5 years. So yes, there's a correlation because sugar is a refined food. The fiber that comes naturally in food has been removed, and now you just are left with the white stuff, right? That increases your blood glucose and causes all kinds of havoc in your body. And so you need fiber to help control your blood sugars, but also to help your mind have the energy it needs to do the complex things that it does. And sugar tends to spike your blood sugars and then drop them. And what happens when you drop? You're cognitively not doing as well. But this concept of not eating too much sugar, it's a Bible concept. In Proverbs 25, verse 27, it says, it is not good to eat what? Much honey. It doesn't tell you shouldn't eat honey. It just says don't eat much honey. And so, again, because it's a refined food, right? I mean, it's a natural food. It's just refined naturally by the bees, right? They went around and picked it all. But either way, we should eat these things sparingly, not as much as you would the fruit itself, right? You want to eat more fruit in its whole form with the fiber. So we continue. What's another natural method? We talked about negative ions, getting outside in the fresh air. That helps our mood. We talked about light therapy, how it helps our mood. We talked about water and how it makes you happier, drinking enough water, and then exercise. And we also talked about avoiding excess sugar. And also here, another thing to talk about, sugar is not good for the stomach. It causes fermentation. And this does what? Clouds the brain and brings peevishness into the disposition. Does anyone know what the term peevishness means? It says it right there. It's a funny definition. I love this definition. Easily irritated, especially by unimportant things. Do we ever find ourselves feeling like that? You know, where it's just like the most minor thing and you feel all worked up about it. And it's just like somebody else is like, why are you so upset? Why are you so anxious about this? And you're just like, I don't know, I'm peevish. And it's like, well, it could be that your stomach's all fermented from the foods you're eating that you're not able to digest well. And sugar is one of those things because it doesn't have the fiber. Fiber helps you digest your food better. So we're going to talk about the gut-brain connection later this week and food that you need to eat as an antidepressant, right? To deal with depression, food that you need to deal with depression. Well, this next thing I'm going to share with you is about morning larks and night owls. What am I talking about? Sleep, right? Types of people who identify as morning larks, that's people who like to get up early. And night owls, people who like to stay up late. Well, we're going to look at some research about these different types of people. Research reported in the journal Emotion looked into happiness and sleep time. They also looked at sleep time, emotion, and age. Less young people are prone to be morning larks. These are people who get up early and mostly go to bed early. As people increase to the age of 60, they are more prone to changing their sleep time to earlier and becoming larks. So you know how some people say, I'm just a night owl, it's in me, it's who I am, but actually they're showing that some people change. And so that means you can change, right? Your habits can be changed so that you're not a night owl, but instead a morning lark, right? But whether people are old or young, those who are morning larks are what? Happier, right? Morning larks are happier. And here it says night owls and mental health. This is huge. I want you to understand this right here. I've never seen anything with this kind of stat. People who are definitively evening people compared with those who are morning people have a 94% higher chance of having what? A psychological disorder. Did you hear that? I don't know anything out there. You know how they say, oh, this can cause cancer and this can do this percentage of cancer. I don't know anything that causes 94% chance of you having a psychological disorder as someone that identifies as being a night owl. And you think about yourself, when you have a lack of sleep, how do you feel? Do you feel all chippery like a morning lark and hi, good morning? You know, and you're like, no, you're grumpy and you're like, get out of my face, right? Isn't that how we feel? And then more so if you're predisposed to depression and other psychological disorders. Sleep is huge. But it's not just about getting to bed on time. Now there's studies showing about getting up early as well. Research looking at over 700,000 people found that for every 1 hour early rising time, you reduce your risk of depression by what? 23%. So let's say, you get up a little earlier tomorrow morning, you can decrease your risk of depression by 23%. And then a few days later, you decide, okay, I'm going to get up 2 hours earlier. Then you reduce it by 46%, right? But the key is don't burn the candle on both ends, right? Don't go to bed late and then think, oh, I'll feel better if I get up early. You have to go to bed early in order to get up early, right? So you got to do both, and it's important. So Chad's going to come up now and tell us more about natural methods of overcoming.
Once again, what we shared right at the beginning was that not any one of these things has the great impact. It is as you put these things together. We're friends with a medical doctor by the name of Dr. Neil Nedley. He has a clinic in California. It's at the Weimar Health Institute, and he has a program called Depression the Way Out. And they have like somewhere around 98% success rate with patients coming into an in-house setting, and within 10 days, around 98% of them have a lowering of their depression within a 10-day period. And if they stick to the principles that are in this clinic, they go on much of the time to simply reverse. Many times they're fully off of medication, and because we are living in a time where life is not natural largely like it was through much of human history. Through much of human history, you'd have exercise was a part of life. You didn't have much of a choice. You had to get out and milk the cows in the morning, or you had to go, fell some trees, or you had to, go out and grow a garden. Grow a farm. You were growing food. It was just part of life. But now, obviously, we have computers, we have lights on in the house. These things are relatively new in human experience, other than things like candles or lamps or lanterns. And so by getting back, learning how to live some of these principles can actually bring us back to being less likely to be depressed. So we've talked about the impact of negative ions on benefiting our health. We've talked about light therapy. We've talked about exercise being good for not only mild to moderate depression, but even for higher levels of significant major depression. We saw sugar obviously sugar in its refined form, because it's actually the opposite. When people eat fruit, they actually have lower depression. We'll look at some of that research another night. But when it comes to refined sugar, that is actually detrimental, and it is something that can forecast future depression. So avoiding alcohol or mind-altering drugs also, obviously, we talked about sleep. Earlier sleep is better, and actually closer to 9 o'clock is actually the best. The closer we get to getting within the natural circadian rhythm that humans were supposed to live in, significantly helps with major depression. This is quite interesting, looking at listening to nature. And my wife and I live in Michigan, and so even coming down here, I go out for a walk in the morning, and I'm out there maybe at 7 or so, and then I hear the birds chirping. You have the mockingbirds here. We don't have many mockingbirds. I don't know that I've ever heard a mockingbird by our house in Michigan, but here I hear them almost every day. And they go through this round of various calls. They mimic other birds. That's why they're called mockingbirds. And it's just such a beautiful sound. But they've actually done some fascinating research. Birds and happiness. Researchers at King's College London found that seeing or listening to birds could enhance an individual's well-being for upwards of 8 hours. Well, if you think about that for a moment, what did humans do throughout history? They spent time outside. So while you were outside, you would hear birds almost all day, most days, right? And then you would go to bed, and how long would you sleep for typically? 8 hours, right? And so then you'd wake up in the morning, and what would you hear again? You would hear birds again. That was just part of human existence. It was a very simple thing. But look at this. Researcher out of the University of Sussex, participants were to listen to either natural environments or artificial environments. And the natural environmental sounds included sounds like wind in the trees, and another environmental sound was a babbling brook. And aren't those both kind of enjoyable sounds to hear? to hear a brook going by, or maybe to hear the wind in the trees. I love both of those sounds. Those are fantastic. And being in Michigan, we lose our leaves quite early, but it's just a beautiful sound. And they did MRI scans on these individuals, and during the natural sound, the brain had an outward focus. The brain had an outward focus. And what they found, quite interestingly, was that during the artificial sounds, these might have been sounds like cityscapes or sounds that are not natural things that you would hear, in the forest. During the artificial sounds, the brain had an inward focus, similar to what is seen in people with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so there's something about the natural sounds that causes us to look outward of ourselves. But yet these maybe city sounds that we're so used to, and I grew up in the city, my wife and I now live in the national forest, so we, now we hear natural sounds all the time. Well, when we're home, we travel most of the time now, but nevertheless, being that as it is, actually went for a hike today out in the forest here, so you have nature all around, which is a great blessing for you. And so what do we see? That these artificial sounds may have a negative impact by making you look inward. Making you look inward. And this isn't to put anybody down that's had depression. I went through 11 years of depression. And I actually look back on those years, and I realized I thought about myself all the time. All the time. They were inward thoughts. Oh, I did this wrong. This. But it was about me. And when the depression went away, it was easier to actually think about other people than thinking about myself. And this is what they see, that depression, anxiety, PTSD is often inward focused. And I don't say that as an insult. It's just simply inward thoughts don't actually make us happy often. Going further, those who at the beginning of the study had the highest levels of stress had the most significant drop in their stress levels during the natural sounds. Now that's interesting. So sometimes you may think, well, if you really struggle with stress, anxiety, depression, you might think, I don't have time. I don't have time to get out in nature. But getting out in nature may have the biggest benefit to you when you are the most stressed, when you are the most anxious. So if you can take that time, whether it's trying to get up early in the morning and do it, or maybe after work or what have you, when you can find that time, choosing to do that can make a significant impact on your mental health. And we read this, it says, to walk out after a meal, hold the head erect, put back the shoulders, and exercise moderately will be a great benefit. The mind will be diverted from self to the beauties of nature, forget self, and think of something cheerful. And we read here, a sweet sense of restfulness and refreshing comes over them as they listen to the murmuring breezes. That's what we just saw in the study there. The drooping spirits revive, the waning strength is recruited, unconsciously the mind becomes peaceful, the fevered pulse more calm and regular. Going along in this vein, we move on to something called the subgenual prefrontal cortex. Kind of this, in our illustration, it's this pink portion in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, called the subgenual prefrontal cortex. This is a part of the brain that is operative when we have what is called rumination. And you may know that animals like cattle are called ruminants. A ruminant is an animal where what they do is they chew the cud, they chew what they're eating, so they'll eat some grass, and they chew it, and they chew it, and they chew it, and then they swallow it. And if you've never been around, farm animals, you may never have noticed this, but next time you're out by a farm, if you didn't grow up around one, watch the cows. You see the same thing with deer. You can see the same thing with buffalo or antelope and various different animals, but we'll stick to the cattle right now. You'll see them sitting, and they'll chew and chew and chew, and you can watch them. You can see them swallow. You can see it go down, you can see their, it's not an Adam's apple, but like their trachea moving, and you can see the food go down, and then you'll see them, and you'll see a regurgitation take place. You'll actually see the reverse experience, and then they'll start chewing and chewing again. That is, they are ruminants. They are animals that chew the cud, they swallow it, they spit it back up, they chew it again, swallow it again, And so they call this experience of what often people who are depressed or anxious do is they go over and over and over the same negative thoughts. Maybe it goes back down and they stop thinking about it, but then they bring it up again. They chew on it for a while, as it were, in their mind and swallow it back down again. But this rumination in this portion of the brain, the subgenual prefrontal cortex, is a portion of the brain that is operative when we have this rumination. Well, let's look at the nature versus urban walking and its effect on rumination. And it has been shown that rumination is a risk factor for mental illness, and a study was reported in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States of America. And they had healthy individuals walk for 90 minutes either in an urban setting or in a natural environment. And what did they find? The results were that those who walked for 90 minutes in a natural setting, in the trees and these kind of things, had a decrease of activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex and lower levels of inflammation. And by the way, what's that? Oh, I'm sorry, lower levels of rumination. And so this actually lowered the activity in this portion of the brain, and the same benefit was not seen in those who had an urban walk. Because you might think, well, maybe it's just the simple act of walking. Maybe it was that exercise that made the greatest impact. But in this case, no, because they put them in two different locations, an urban area versus a natural location. And the impact to lower the activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex was specifically better after going out in nature. We're used to things like for instance, on this wall, you have these 90-degree angles all over the place. Like, this is a part of human experience now. But in nature, you have all different kinds of angles, and our eyes just settle down, and there's a sense of peace that comes over us when we're in natural environments that's really not replicated in a man-made type experience. Obviously, we're not going to all go live outside. I'm not expecting that. But the more that we can take time in these kind of places, the better it is for our mental health. And here's the thing. We've talked about a few things. We're going to be talking about more this week. We're specifically going to talk about food that can either increase rates of depression, anxiety, these kinds of things. We'll talk about food that can lower your chances of having anxiety, depression, and so forth later in the week. So we've just talked about a few things tonight, but this is what I want you to think about. They did an inquiry at the University of Michigan. My wife and I, as I said, we come from Michigan, and they found that people who believe that they are in control of their lives, or what they call autonomy, had the highest levels of happiness. Does anybody like being controlled by somebody else? No, that's kind of a human experience. For instance, if I told you, you have to go do this, our natural human experience is to think, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do what you told me to do, right? And by the way, I'm not forcing anybody to do anything in this seminar. We're trying to give you some of the latest research that is out there, some of these things, both physical and even some spiritual, beneficial things you can do. But the reality is nobody's forcing it. Freedom of choice is what we are given. At least we have that right now, right? And I'm happy for that. But people who believe that they have autonomy or that they're in control of their lives have the highest level of happiness. And it even happens in life when a bunch of things are going bad all around you and you feel like there's nothing I can do. That can really put a hamper on your level of happiness, right? And here's the thing. I read this old quotation from like 100 years ago. It said, over 100 years, but, that everyone might realize that he is the arbiter, the decider of his own destiny. Your happiness for this life and your future immortal life lies with yourself. And looking at this, you may have heard about a study. If you've ever taken like a Psych 101 course, where in psychology they'll teach you a fascinating study that was done back in the 1960s and 70s by a scientist by the name of Martin Seligman. And if I remember correctly, it was done with beagles. And I don't think they would even, they would probably allow this. I don't think it would be considered ethical today, but they used to do a lot of animal studies that were kind of torturous. But nevertheless, this one was one of those. And what they did was they took these beagles and they divided them into 3 groups. One group, they would strap them all down for a time. One of the groups that was strapped down, they would strap them down but wouldn't do anything negative to them. The second group, they would strap them down and then they would shock them. But next to the snout of this dog that had been strapped down would be a little lever, and the dog could depress the lever with its snout. And as it would depress the lever with its snout, it would turn off the pain of this shock that was taking place from the electricity. The third group, they would just shock them, and there was nothing the dogs could do about it. So it was just kind of a torturous experience for the dogs. Okay, so then they took them out of the harnesses where they were strapped down. They brought them separately, one at a time, into a cage that was separated. It had two sides. One of them had a metal floor that could be electrified, had a tiny little fence. The fence was probably just several inches. These dogs could, almost just step over it, but they could easily jump over the fence. And so the first group that had been shocked but had no other ill thing happened to it, the moment they turned on the electrified floor and began to shock their paws, those dogs would just jump to the other side, and then they would rid themselves of the suffering that they had just endured. The second group that had been strapped down, shocked, but could stop the shock with the lever, they too, when the floor was electrified, they just jumped to the other side and they would avoid pain. The third group, on the other hand, that had been shocked but could do nothing about the torture they were receiving, what ended up happening was when they turned on the electrified floor, the dogs just began to howl, and they kind of whimpered and cried, and then they would just lie down on that electrified floor, and they would just take the electrical shock. And so the scientists came up with a term that they referred to as learned helplessness. Now, could you imagine that ever taking place in human beings? Yes or no? Yeah, I can imagine that, right? And so not only animals, and they weren't just doing this to torture animals, it was the idea of, is this what could also happen in humans? And this can happen in humans for sure. Maybe you're raised in a very difficult situation at home. Maybe there's abuse. Maybe there's all kinds of trauma. Maybe there's, extreme poverty and these kind of things. There's nothing I can do about it, right? And you can imagine how you could get to the point where you believe that, what? I'm helpless. Nothing I do makes any difference to my life. Just give up, right? When maybe there is something you could do. Now, as a kid, you might not be able to do much because you're a child, and there's only so many things you can do, and that is true. And I really feel sympathy for anybody that would have to endure that. But the good news is, as we become adults, we actually can make decisions. Even if it has been this way in the past, and I'm not downplaying the past experience, not even one iota, but we can make decisions that can impact our future. And so they've actually done some research on this, on simply, this is quite interesting. Looking at, no, that was not what, I don't know. That's what I was going to share. I will actually share about that. That's right. I forgot what I put that in there. My wife and I, we actually have a number of Amish friends or people who used to be Amish, and I was going to buy some hardwood flooring from an Amish fellow up in Michigan, and I got to his house, began to talk with him, and was looking at the wood that he was selling, and it was actually horrible wood. It was like wholly, like you could not imagine. It was like cheese wood, and so there was all these I decided not to buy the wood, because once again, we get to make decisions in life. But either way, I got talking with him, and as I was talking with him, he said that he had some gastrointestinal problems, and he had serious depression. And now, what's strange was, I had for 11 years serious intestinal problems, and had 11 years of depression. But by this point, I had overcome it. And so I began to talk to him. I said, I've been through the exact same thing you're going through. It was horrible. It was like you think like, how bad could it be? It was a living nightmare. Life was just, every morning waking up, you didn't want to be awake. But I would work. I would work all day. I was actually traveling the world. I was making documentary films. I was, I was traveling and speaking and so forth. But I was totally depressed. I felt horrible. But here I was talking to this Amish fellow, and I said, I've actually been there. I know what it's like. And so I began to talk to him and said, hey, there's certain things you could try. You can maybe try doing this or change this. And he said, I've tried all kinds of things. I've tried so many things. I don't even want to try anymore. And I told him, I said, you know what? I totally get it. I fully understand that. It makes sense to me. Like, hey, you tried 10 things, 20 things, 30 things. You're like, it didn't work. Why would I try another one? And I said, you know what? I actually tried all kinds of different things, And none of them worked. But I kept trying. And finally, I found something. I tried it. And guess what? In 2 weeks, my depression went away. What if I would have stopped at like the 20th thing and wouldn't have tried the 21st? I said, I'm not telling you have to do any of this. But what if? What if it's the next thing that you try that will actually change your life? And he did actually call me back later and tell me that he had found something that finally helped him. When I say call, Amish generally don't call, but he somehow was able to access a phone. No, he had a business, and this Amish, there's different, I don't know what you call them, sects or groups or orders. That is the word, order. Different orders of Amish, and some of them do allow telephones, and they have to be, I think, outside of their house. They literally have a little phone booth outside their house. And so, but nevertheless, he was able to call me and contact me and tell me about that. And I say that simply saying, I challenge people never to give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. I'm so glad that I didn't give up. I want to tell you one quick story, too. We've met a man, some of you may have heard of him. He's on television and such, but his name is Doug Batchelor, and he's a man of Jewish ethnicity, is Jewish descent, and he shares a story of how his parents were very, very, very wealthy, extremely wealthy. And at one point, his mom called him up, and she said, I'm thinking of committing suicide. And he said to her, you know, I've thought about it too, actually. And he said, but then I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? You try all kinds of different things in life. Some things you love, and some things you try you don't like. And he said, then I thought about it. I thought, well, what if I kill myself and then I don't like it? Well, the trouble is, then I can't take it back. I can't go back. And she heard her son, and she said, you know what? That's a really good point. She said, I think I'm not going to kill myself. And you may have heard, does anybody know the most popular place? There's one specific place in the United States that is the most popular place to commit suicide. Anybody know what it is? Yes, you got it. It's the Golden Gate Bridge. Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco, right? I've had the opportunity to go out on the Golden Gate Bridge. And by the way, you may have just heard, they just put out nets across the whole thing. I think it costs like $700 million or something like that. What's that? Isn't that long? Very long. Yes, very long. And so, obviously, I mean, somebody made a good pretty penny with $700 million worth of nets, but that's beside the point, you know. I hope it does actually save lives. I'm not saying that as funny, but it's a lot of money there. But nevertheless, beside the point, the reason why people die when they jump off the Golden Gate Bridge isn't because they hit like rocks or something like that. That it is so high that when you hit the water at that speed, it is so violent that normally it can break your back, it can break bones. It is very violent to jump from that high. So most people can't, once they hit the water, I mean, you knock the wind out of yourself if you actually, you know, I mean, if not worse, and others may even break their back. And so most people never make it to shore alive, they're dead. But they have had a few people survive, actually a number of people survive, and they actually made an effort to go out and find these people and to interview them and ask them some questions. And they asked each of them the same questions. They asked number one, they said, did you regret jumping? And every single one of them had the same answer. They said, yes, I did. And then they asked them a follow-up question. They said, when? When did you regret jumping? And they all said the same thing. The second I jumped. And so I say that to anybody that could potentially be struggling with depression, that if you actually went through with it, you wouldn't be happy. And so I say that not to put anybody down, but I say that to give you, just like the man talking to his father, or his mother rather, Doug Batchelor sharing with his mother, you know, what if you didn't like it? And the fact is, almost nobody would like it. So how much better to make a decision and say, you know, I'm not going to do that. Now, I happen to be a spiritual person, and that is one of the things that actually encouraged me. I would pray. You know, I never really wanted to commit suicide. That really wasn't a thing for me, but I was terribly, terribly depressed But I do know of other people who are wanting to commit suicide. But I would challenge you, just don't do it. And if you're ever feeling that way, that is a great time to pray, even if you're not a praying kind of person. The research shows, study after study after study has shown the benefits for people in times of depression and times of anxiety, how much that can make a serious difference in their life. But let's get back to the research. Research on how to return to autonomy. A researcher from Yale conducted a study on depressed elderly people who were living in a nursing home, which, by the way, is a place where you feel like you don't have autonomy. Somebody's feeding you, somebody's cleaning you up. It's kind of depressing because you're not feeling like you have a lot of choices to make. And so they asked them to make choices, these elderly people in the nursing home, they asked them to make choices on what food they ate, if they want to change the channel on television, if they wanted to have the furniture rearranged, or if they wanted to change the air conditioning. Some pretty simple things. And they also had them request to change policies in the nursing home, and these were granted, meaning their requests were granted. Well, 93% of those who were given choices to make changes became happier and more active in their lives. What a powerful thing. What a powerful thing is that simply knowing okay, maybe I would like a different meal, and asking for that and having that change, it actually can make a little difference in your life. Asking for things and choosing to make a decision can make you a happier person. Now, thinking about this, we have just talked about a number of things, and I'm going to repeat them in just a moment, but we've talked about a number of habits like getting out in the sun. Simply getting out in the sun can significantly lower levels of depression. Going to bed earlier in the evening can lower your risk. I used to be, by the way, a night owl. I used to go to bed at 2, 3 in the morning every night, and then I'd have to go to school the next day. This was my lifestyle. I'd be tired like crazy. I'd be sitting in chairs like this or whatever. And actually, it was more high school that I would do that. And while I was there, I was just falling asleep during school. And I didn't feel good. I didn't feel good about life. I didn't enjoy life. And so you might think, well, I'm just a night. That's just who you are. It's just your genetics. But the reality is you can choose to change. Because just like we've talked about, you do have autonomy. You are an adult now. You can make decisions in your life. And if you're one of those people where you do have a night job and you struggle with depression, I would challenge you to seek to find new employment. The good news is we're living at a time where people are hiring for all kinds of things. And this would be the great time if you're a night owl and you work all night and you're okay and you're not depressed, well, maybe you can work. Somebody does have to work at night. But if you are one of the people that have struggled with depression and you could change that or seek to change that, that is a form of autonomy, and both the act of doing it and actually getting to bed earlier can make that difference. So autonomy, we've looked at different things, and beginning to put some of these together can actually make you a happier person. And looking at this, now I want to jump forward. This is one other factor. This is quite interesting. They've actually done more than one study on this. And can reading lower stress levels? Can reading lower stress levels? Research in the journal Psychology and Health reports that during the COVID pandemic, certain activities have been shown to lower stress. Some of the things that have shown to decrease stress have been outdoor physical activities, gardening, reading, and prayer, while movies and television have actually increased stress levels. And we're going to look a little, I'll potentially be looking at a separate study later, but they found that actually one specific study looking at reading showed that reading can lower stress levels by nearly 70% in just 6 minutes of reading. 6 minutes of reading. That's not very long, right? Focusing your frontal lobe can make a significant impact. And so, obviously, from a religious standpoint, things like the Bible. We've been given these things, and we're told that there is peace that comes along with reading. And now research tells us, yes, that is actually true. Reading can actually make a significant difference in our spiritual and our mental life. Now, I want to talk about putting all these things together right now. Putting these things together. My wife and I went backpacking in England. And what was happening is we were living in Iceland at the time, and we had to leave the country for a certain amount of time period, and I don't need to go into all the specifics, but we had to wait to get back into Iceland. And we went backpacking with my wife, myself, and another guy with us, and so we're backpacking in what's called the Two Moors Way between Dartmoor and Exmoor in England, kind of western England. And basically, while we were doing this, we had backpacks that were so ridiculously heavy. I had like probably an 80-pound backpack. And I'm not that big of a guy. Now, if you weigh maybe 220 and you're a big, buff man, hey, might be able to handle that well. I was doing it, but it was super, super heavy. And so we're just walking, and we're walking and walking. And, and my wife's wasn't 80 pounds, but hers was ridiculous for her little body. And we had another guy with us, and he had a massive bag on us. And as we were going, the nice thing was we were eating. The reason it was partly so heavy is because we had a bunch of food with us, like too much food. Yeah, we had this lady. She was a little Bulgarian lady that we were staying with for a bit there. And, some of these kind-hearted people just like, no, you need more. And she was very kind. She wasn't being mean. And so because of that, we had so much food, it was just ridiculously heavy. And then we had grocery bags. So not only did we have that, but we're walking with grocery bags full of food on this, this is ridiculous. This is like the worst way to go, hiking. But nevertheless, that's what we were doing. But while we were out, we would, you'd go and you'd eat breakfast and you'd eat lunch and so forth. And we would be offering the others with us, would you like some of my food? Because you're looking to get rid of some of this weight on your back, right? And looking at what we're talking about, just a kind of a parallel here. Looking at some of the things we talked about, like for instance, we talked about, one of the simplest things we talked about tonight was drinking water. Because what they found is, as you heard, basically drinking how many glasses of water? 6 glasses of water compared with 1 glass or under a day. By drinking 6 glasses of water or more a day, it makes you 3 times more likely to be very happy in life. I don't mean that all depression will go away by having 6 glasses of water a day. No, it won't, right? But that is one simple factor. And then comparing that head to head, they did research. You would think, well, great, I drink like 8 Mountain Dews a day, so I drink more than enough water, right? Well, they found just the opposite, that soda or pop actually increases rates of depression. So it's just the opposite, right? So that's just one very small factor. So the point is transitioning from sugar-sweetened beverages like I only drank growing up. I would almost never drink water. I thought, that tastes terrible. But now I've switched to the point where I virtually never drink anything. Maybe every once in a while I'll have some kind of herbal tea or something like that. But otherwise, I don't drink anything but water. And I love water now. And by the way, we're staying near hot springs, and they have those springs right in the city where you can actually go and fill up. We fill up our gallons there, and oh man, I love the water over there. And I know sometimes even in the backwoods or anywhere, I don't know about around here, sometimes I'll have these little springs you can go to and fill up your bottles, right? Free water. And by doing that, and you think, well, I don't like that. You could put a little lemon juice or squeeze some lemon in there or something if you can't handle the taste of water. But that's one simple fact. Now, that's only one thing. So that might, let's say each one of these habits we've talked about may add or take away like 10 or 20 pounds from your back. So let's say if you only drink soda, it's like adding 20 pounds to your backpack. Well, okay, if you just drank soda and drink water, you could still walk with 20 pounds on your back, right? You could do that. So let's say then you maybe you don't exercise. We saw that exercise is one of the key components of helping people overcome depression. Even severe depression can be overcome in part, it's one of the factors, by lowering levels of depression. So let's say instead of exercise adding another 20 pounds, maybe exercise is even more significant. It might be even 30 pounds. So now let's say you're just drinking soda, you don't exercise, not like you have 50 pounds in your back. So you can still walk. You can still walk. But let's say you don't get out and get any sunlight. That'd be like adding another 20 pounds. You might be up to like 70 pounds now. Now, once again, I could still walk at that point, but it's not easy at that point to walk anymore. You get the idea? And then let's say you are like I used to be. You'd stay up all night, not get enough sleep, and I think that honestly is closer to like 50 pounds. So now you add that, and now you got like, 120, 130 pounds on your back, and you're finally getting to the point you simply almost can't walk at all anymore. Does that make sense? Now, autonomy tells you, okay, we just looked at a few of these things, and dietary change, that can make a difference too, and we'll talk about that more as we talk about the gut-brain connection and happiness and depression. But each one of these things, so you have autonomy. You're not a child anymore. Even if you feel like there's nothing I can do, you can. You can make a difference. You can make decisions. And by simply saying, okay, I'm going to start drinking water. And so that's like taking 20 pounds away, and you're like, whoa, I feel just a little bit better, not massively, just a little bit. And then maybe you start the exercise and boom, you take 30, now 50 pounds are gone. You're like, whoa, man, this is really making a difference. And then you start going to bed earlier. And then you start getting sunlight. You start doing all of the things we've talked about, and they begin to create a synergistic effect where the sum are great, the totality are greater than the sum of its parts. This powerful experience begins to take place, and part of it is actually simply making the decision. Simply making the decision for you to change your lifestyle can actually help you to be able to overcome and to become a happier person. And I would challenge you, not forcing it all. But if you can think of some of the things we just talked about tonight, I want to share with you one thing as we close. I told you that I am a spiritual person personally. By no means do I force this on anybody, but it's interesting. Looking back even through history, looking even back at the Bible talks about Jesus in Isaiah chapter 53, and it says that he was a man acquainted with sorrows. Sorrows and acquainted with grief. That this was a man that he himself went through grief and sorrow. And it's interesting because there's a popular song that even if somebody's not Christian, they probably, at least in the United States, heard of an old Christian hymn that was called Amazing Grace, right? And it said, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Now, if you heard those first words, Amazing Grace, you'd kind of know, oh yeah, that's that old song, right? You'd kind of know that. Simple, right? Whether you're a Christian or not, you might kind of know that. And the Jewish people historically would memorize they would memorize much of the Old Testament, but they would historically, especially the Psalms, because that was like their hymnal, the Psalms. And when Jesus was actually on the cross, and when you look at that, it's interesting, when he was on the cross, he had 7 different statements. And one of those statements, he said the words, my God, why have you, anybody know? Forsaken me, right? That experience, you could imagine feeling forsaken. Imagine somebody, a family member, forsakes you, or whatever it is. That is a depressing feeling. And what's interesting is when Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He was actually quoting from the Old Testament, from Psalms 22. And he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, when he said that, that would have been like someone today saying, Amazing Grace. Well, you know what comes next. How sweet the sound. So the Jews would have known, hey, this guy's, he's telling us about one of the hymns. He's telling us about one of the Psalms. And so what does it say? It says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? This is what was going on in his mind while he's on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you hear not, and in the night season, and am not silent. And sometimes people feel that way when they're depressed. They feel kind of like what he went through. Just like, this is horrible. This is a living nightmare. Nobody cares. Nobody's listening. And actually, there's another passage in Psalm 69 that says, he looked for some to take pity, but he found no one. Like, this is the experience. This is like human experience at times. Many people go through this, where like nobody seems to care. But it's interesting that while he was feeling this way, the next part of the hymn, I believe, gives us an idea of where his mind continued on to. He says, but you are holy, O you that inhabitest the praises of Israel. So notice, the first part of it was, why are you far away from me? They were actually somewhat thoughts of self. Why am I feeling this way? And I'm not putting him down for saying that. That's normal. But then he changes his focus to something else, to somebody else. Instead of having an inward, having an outward focus, like we talked about. And then it says in verse 4 and 5, our fathers trusted in you. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried unto you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not confounded. So then he's looking back on the fathers, the people that came before him. And he said, those people who were rebellious, fighting against your law, you even sought to save them. And choosing to focus our mind on something better, that maybe we can be saved. Maybe I won't have to live with depression for the rest of my life. Maybe there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe I shouldn't kill myself. Maybe I can have hope for something better in the future. And by choosing to make simple lifestyle changes like we've talked about, getting out in the sunlight, getting some exercise, drinking water, we're going to talk about some dietary changes, the exercise, the light therapy. If you can't get out in the sun because you work during the day, you can get one of those light boxes. They're probably like $30 on Amazon, and we have them at our house, and we don't use it much, but they're there if we ever need them in the winter, and there's something you could be eating breakfast and just shine it right on you. All of these things can make a significant difference, and you choosing to do this can potentially be life-changing. But it's up to you. You get to make your own decisions in life because you genuinely do have autonomy. Well, we're going to close. I'm going to close with a prayer, if that is okay. Heavenly Father, thank you that you do care for us. Thank you that we've been able to look at these things. I pray that you would, if somebody is struggling with these things, just like I did for more than a decade, I pray that they would find victory. In Jesus' name, amen. Just want to let you know very quickly, tomorrow, looking at dopamine, happiness, and depression. This is actually powerful research tomorrow. Very powerful. Then we'll come back on Thursday. We skip Wednesday, so we will not be here on Wednesday, but Thursday we'll be back. This is actually the information. What's going to come Thursday and Friday on the gut-brain connection to depression and intellect. So that'll be Thursday. That's part 1. Part 2 is going to be on Friday. That is actually specifically how my gut was healed, but not just my opinion. It's not like 2 days of my opinion. We're going to go through the scientific literature, the peer-reviewed research, because when it changed my life, I didn't know why I did. I thought, why did this work? Why did this dietary change, this transformation, why did it work? And then I began to study the research, and the research was already out there. And since that time, much more research, because the gut-brain connection is kind of a burgeoning field. It's been around for, but really the last probably 10 years is when it's really taken off. It's been around before that, but now it's something that they're just doing study after study after study on. This has been the most life-changing thing for me. And we're going to show you some of that research as you come back. And then we're going to be going on deeper after that. Thank you so much for coming. I'll be outside if you have any questions or would like to talk. Have a wonderful evening. So 6:30 each night.